Welcome back. I'm Keith Barry.
I'm Cassidy Simpson.
I'm Michael Crossan.
And we're going to talk cars today, but first, before we get into that, there's a new face, and if you're listening, a new voice, and that is Cassidy. So why don't you introduce yourself, tell us what you do here at CR and what you did before.
Yeah, so like I said, my name's Cassidy Simpson. I've been at CR for just over a year now, and I'm one of the automotive engineers. I handle a lot of the infotainment systems, so the evaluations of that, as well as the connectivity, your phone, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. I'm also part of some of the usability teams, and I lead the ease of charging debrief that we do for UX evaluations.
So almost everything we're going to talk about today, other than electric, because the car we're talking about today is not electric, which is a bit of a change from a couple of recent episodes. We are talking today about the 2025 Mini Cooper S hardtop two-door, which is the official name for the car that most people just call a Mini Cooper. We got the S, so that means it is a 201 horsepower, 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. There's a 7-speed dual clutch automatic transmission because there's no more stick shifts on Minis as of the 2025 model year, and it's front-wheel drive. Also gone is the 3-cylinder engine, which used to be the base engine. It's now a 4-cylinder to start. It's really odd that there aren't any stick shifts anymore because a pretty high percentage of buyers were stick shift buyers who chose a
I'm on one hand, I'm surprised to learn this and see this, but also it's kind of the way things go, right?
Yeah.
The stick shift is unfortunately dying.
Yeah, it's too bad. But the Mini is still, we think, a little bit of a fun car. MSRP for the S starts at $34,600. We added some features, including adaptive cruise control with stop and go for traffic jams, roof rails, interior camera, we'll get to that, and a $995 destination charge. We paid just under $37,000. And, the final assembly point in this vehicle was in Oxford, UK, but it is BMW owned. Mini's been BMW owned for a while. That is kind of one of the reasons that we have Cassidy here, because as our resident British person, I'm kind of curious as to what you think, because they really like to play up the Britishness of the car, regardless of where the parts come from or where the ownership is. So what did you think when you're here and all of a sudden the Mini shows up, something from home?
Oh my gosh. So I was so excited to drive this vehicle, and I felt a really strong sense of patriotism towards the UK. There's so many Union Jacks, but alas, the feeling of patriotism very quickly morphed into horror once I actually got into the vehicle itself and started driving the car.
Okay, so I think of it as English, but what did you think?
Oh gosh, honestly, it's just the infotainment system, to be honest with you. It's just the thing that it's the round center screen, which it's a really cool aesthetic look, but the functionality of it isn't that great. It's got really high, bright and crisp graphics, and it's really cute. It's a very cute infotainment system, but actually using it while driving, it's not good.
So I'm glad you're here for several reasons, because you're not just our resident English person, you're also our infotainment expert. So it's sort of two levels of expertise here. We talked about this round screen that sort of looks like the old-fashioned speedometer in the older Minis. We talked about this with the Countryman, which is the first car that we had that had this. And I remember it had some hiccups and weirdness, and it kind of squeezed the screen in there for CarPlay. What did you find? When, what were the pain points, as they would say?
Oh gosh, there's so many. Definitely some of the climate pain points. It took me the second time driving this vehicle to actually realize that the climate itself, you actually have to tap on it and then slide up and down. That was one of the big issues. I mean, climate itself is just 2 steps. Everything is done within the center screen, but you have to go into a climate menu. And then, like you said, with CarPlay, it's just there's so much real estate, but it is such a tiny screen that it really is difficult to see at times.
Absolutely. And then also, unless you have, there is that heads up display, but it's like, feels kind of glued on, right?
Yeah. So at first I didn't even realize it was a heads up display, which is awful to say, but I really didn't. And
you're not the only one. Almost everyone who's gotten into one of these new Minis has come across this. It's like the flap up.
Yeah,
type.
it just pops up when you start the vehicle. I didn't mind it too much. I actually found it helpful because having the driver's display in the center screen itself, It's just, there's so much information going on. You're constantly looking what's my speed versus when you've got the heads up display, at least it's right there in front of you. It is weird that it's not on the windshield itself. That did take a little bit of getting used to. And I felt like no matter how you tried to change the settings, it was always slightly rotated, even when it wasn't like in the settings. So,
yeah. And there is supposed to be like voice control, right?
Yeah. Oh, the voice controls. My favorite thing ever. So spoiler alert, the voice controls have an English accent. So I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to be excellent, right? It's got to understand me. How can it not? I mean, we speak the same language. So you press it, and this is my test for all of them. I go, set temperature to 74, because systems have an issue with hearing 74. They say it's 75. I'm not sure why. So it goes back and it goes, setting temperature to 75 degrees. So I'm like, okay then. So I try it again and I go, set temperature to 74 degrees.
There you go.
And it goes, setting temperature to 74 degrees. I'm like, I said it the same way. Yeah.
It's funny though, because with these systems, when you're selling in a market like the United States, there are so many ways that people speak English in the United States. And it's from regional accents to people who learned another language first and are speaking English, or, anything. You have to get that right. And you'd think that of all cars, a British car would get a British accent, but
surprisingly, Tesla does actually get it right. So they have a ridiculous amount of different, voice systems you can change it to, and one of them's British English. So when I changed it to British English in that car, then it was able to understand the difference between a 4 and a 5. So I will give Tesla props for that. It's a shame that Mini couldn't do it. Do better.
That's very interesting. So it's funny because this is a car that's meant to be driven and enjoyed, and it sounds like those are kind of distractions from the driving experience. But if you kind of put that aside, you get your tunes on, or you turn it off and you listen to the engine noise, which sometimes is augmented and pumped in, but whatever, it's 2024, we'll forgive them for that because everyone's doing it. The actual driving experience, now Mike, you also are here because you have some Mini experience, right?
So yeah, I worked at a Mini dealership. I wrote service there for a very short period of time, but basically I was brought in to be the warranty administrator after having worked a service advisor job for the same company. They have a bunch of different brands. So I got to learn about the brand and meet the customers and learn the customers. And so I have quite a bit of experience with Minis, different generations of them and things like that. And of course, the things that go wrong with them and usability as well. And I think everything you said, Cassidy, is right. Just right on this car. That screen it is cute, but terrible use of space. And, but again, Keith, yeah, you're right. This is about kind of the driving experience, right? Mini owners love their cars. They name their cars. The cars are practically part of the family, and they love to get out and drive them. I mean, there's an event called Mini Takes the States where hundreds of Mini owners get together and just drive all over the U.S. on this pre-planned route. So, Mini customers drive their cars. They just love these things. And that's something that, we all got a chance to do. And I'm not the biggest, proponent for stick shift. I mean, I love it, but I don't think not having it ruins a car. However, there is something missing in this one for the driving experience is that, it's the dual clutch. It's basically like an auto, but there's no paddles. You can't hold a gear, if you're in some tight corners and things like that. And, it takes something away. It's just missing just that little bit.
That engagement.
Exactly.
Yeah. And also the other thing, which is kind of bridges both of those, is that almost everyone in our logbook where we write they complained about the auto start stop feature on this, where first of all, in order to turn it off, you have to go into 2 menus, like you said, everything's 2 menus, and because of the dual clutch transmission and the small engine and et cetera, has the same issue that a lot of the smaller BMWs have, where there's this hesitation when you go off the line and the car needs to start, wake up. And at least if you've named it, you can yell at it to get out of bed.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, I will give them a little bit of credit here. It's basically the same kind of system that's in the X2, but I think it's a little bit better in the Mini. It's just not quite as sort of clunky and so disconnected. But when we do our city fuel economy testing, that's sort of a big thing. These cars that kind of start and stop and how we manage that. And they are difficult to drive. They take a few sort of practice laps, if you will, before we actually start getting the real numbers, just because we kind of have to, again, refresh ourselves with how the car will behave, particularly in those very specific situations. But definitely, it's something to kind of be aware of. Mini's been doing this stop start for a while. They used to have a dedicated button where you could turn it off. You'd have to do it on every single key cycle. But it is sort of people I think might call it an annoyance.
Yeah.
Definitely something you probably do get used to if you buy the car and live with it day in and day out. But just things to kind of think about. If you're interested in when you go on your test drive, kind of pay attention to those things and see if that's something you can live with.
Yeah. Something that I find kind of interesting is reliability, because I'm sure when you were working at Mini many years ago, there were probably maybe a decent amount of warranty claims on newer cars, and that's changed. They've actually gotten pretty high up in CR's ratings.
They have. So basically, the new Minis are pretty good.
And when you say the new Minis, you mean
recently, the last couple,
Minis.
Yeah, exactly. In the last few years, anyway. Initial reliability has gotten a whole lot better, and part of that is I think they're definitely paying attention to that. It's something that they care about, but also again, these customers, Mini buyers, they just love their cars. So I think sometimes they're willing to live with some of the quirks, and your car isn't broken down. Your car is sick, whatever you've named your car. So if your car's name is Keith, Keith is sick.
Yeah.
Keith has a check engine light. We need to get Keith, to feel better, that kind of thing. So I think there's sort of an attitude that happens there. But yeah, pretty good reliability, on initial. Another thing that's really nice is you get 3 years of included maintenance. So that sort of alleviates some of that stress when you do have to bring your car in. Your oil change, the tire rotation, if it's time for a brake fluid flush, that's all going to be covered.
Yeah.
So that's a nice ownership perk. And just, again, I think just relieves stress of bringing your car in for service.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of that you're talking about that connection to the car, and you were talking about the look, the being able to customize things, the Union Jacks, but I think the cars become a little more livable. At least, I mean, my first experiences in Mini, I was looking for got a new job. It was the first generation Mini. I had to commute. I was looking for something fuel efficient, so I went to a Mini dealer in Peabody, Massachusetts, and the salesperson on the test drive at me was yelling at me that I wasn't driving it hard enough. He just kept screaming, "You drive like my grandparents. Hit the gas, hit the gas!" And I'm thinking, I'm on a test drive. But this one, I remembered those early ones. They had a real kind of go-kart feel to them, in almost kind of verging on a bad way. But this one, it feels a little more livable, right? There's the sense of like you could just sort of drive it. You're not getting your coffee knocked out of the cup holder or anything like that.
Yeah, it's still a Mini. It's still rough compared to a lot of cars. And in our logbook, a lot of people sort of complained about that, but I think it's very appropriate for a Mini. I got in it having driven a lot of Minis, and it's exactly what I expected. But I think it is a little bit cushier, a little bit more livable. Part of that is maybe because it isn't a stick, right? And that just sort of adds to some of the things you have to do as the driver, as you're rolling through the gears and things like that. But I mean, This car is still a riot. It's still a really good time, especially on back roads. It's very nimble. It rotates really well, and it makes good power. Those early Minis with the supercharged engine, they were just rowdy. I mean, they were a bit of a handful. They could torque steer, and you had the supercharger whine. Some of that's gone away, which I think helps. It's not the quietest of all vehicles. You get some wind noise, you get some road noise, and things like that. But definitely sort of lacking that supercharger whine, the rowdiness definitely just I think makes it a little bit easier to live with in daily drive.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the other things that have changed on it make it a little harder to live with every day.
Yeah.
There is that interesting, and we're going to look into this. There's that, and the other Mini had the same thing, that interior camera that's supposed to be for selfies, but I don't know. It might be able to. What is it looking at? We're going to find out, right?
Yeah, it's insane. There's quite a lot of vehicles now that have cameras in for selfies, for Zoom, or TikTok. Yeah.
So we'll look into that. All right, so the Mini, we have a longer first drive of a very small car, and we're going to keep an eye on Mini as they kind of transition as a brand. There's an electric version that's coming. We're definitely going to try that. We just bought the electric, actually you and I just bought electric Countryman. So we're going to kind of be looking at the new Mini brand from all angles as they go forward in a world without stick shifts and with batteries for better, worse, and in between. So head over to cr.org, search for the Mini Cooper S review. So away from the Mini and onto your questions, which you have sent to us at cr.org/talkingcars. That's cr.org/talkingcars. If you send us a question there and you use it, this is a new thing we're doing. We send you swag. So you see people are wearing like stuff with CR on it. I mean, we're not going to send that. That's kind of nice, but we're going to send you some cool stuff. So the first person who's going to get something in the mail sent to them, some CR swag, is Rick from Chesapeake, Virginia, who asks, my iPhone 8 Plus has served me well for about 7 years now, but I'm also learning that updates to apps won't be available in the future. That happens. So that makes me think of how cars are using electronics so much more, especially in display screens, in HVAC, climate controls. I know that CR's surveys focus on engine and transmission issues, but will future surveys collect data that speaks to the reliability of infotainment systems and displays that are so frequently found in newer cars? So, Cassidy, I'm going to throw that one to you because this is your area of expertise.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, infotainment is actually included in the reliability survey, but it's not weighted as heavily as some of the other things like transmission.
Yeah.
So it's pretty common for vehicles to receive software updates either over the air or at the dealership. And these updates are usually adding or changing features. So, for example, our 2022 Rivian R1S just received an over-the-air update, and it completely revamped the climate screen and a few other display screens. We've seen something as well in like Hyundai vehicles. One of the Konas that we had received an over-the-air update to enable wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto on some of their vehicles.
And Volvo said they're going to do the same thing too, which is good because Volvo's infotainment system is subpar.
Questionable.
Yeah. So
that was very kind of you, Keith.
Yeah, it was subpar. It's really interesting because like at the same time, there are there's this tension between like, yes, we're eventually someday someone's going to stop releasing software for it. But for now, your car might actually get better the longer you own it because of the fact these updates are getting sent out.
Yes. And then even on some of the older systems, they may also be backwards compatible. So you could get Apple CarPlay put in them as well. So
yeah, I remember a few years ago, Mazda did that. You could just plug something in and you had to pay for it. It's also kind of, again, it's something where it used to be that a car dealer would sell a car and that was the only time they would make money off it. Now they can make money off used cars because you have to pay for these things. That's interesting. So we do include that in the survey though.
Yes, it's included. Yeah.
Excellent. So we have another question from Tom from Godwin, North Carolina. Tom asks, how can I safely add insulation under the hood of an older Subaru Forester to reduce engine noise in the passenger compartment? Is spray-on styrofoam safe on the firewall, underside of the hood, or anywhere else? Please do not send Tom a sweatshirt. He's just going to stuff it under the engine of the car. Mike, what advice do we have here?
So I would say, Tom, number one, don't add anything under the hood.
No.
There's always a risk of fire. It could get tangled up in belts and things like that. The move here, I would say number one is just make sure that the exhaust on the vehicle is in good shape. That you don't have any leaks, rattles from the heat shields and things like that. Subarus definitely have a bit of a history of that, especially up here in New England. I know Tom's down in North Carolina. I think he's just outside Fayetteville. But the weather's better than ours, so rust is probably less of an issue. But number one, make sure your exhaust is in good shape. I would say number two, again, this is some Subaru stuff here, but make sure your tires are in good shape. Some tires are noisier than others. Wheel bearings. Subarus have trouble with wheel bearings, particularly those rear wheel bearings. And that can cause like a big gravelly kind of noise as you're going down the road. And over time, it just kind of sneaks up on you. You think, my car is getting louder, it's getting old. You just need a new wheel bearing. So get that checked out. Same thing with all the bushings, the struts, all that kind of stuff. As they age, everything just sort of adds up. And the equation is not as good as it was when it was once new.
Which, to be fair, in an older Forester, it wasn't the quietest car to begin with.
It wasn't, but then imagine you have a wheel bearing, you have a transmission mount that's starting to sag, you're starting to get some vibration through the car on that. So again, it all just adds up, and it's kind of all of a sudden one day you're like, man, this thing's really loud. Didn't used to be quite this bad. So just make sure the car is kind of in tip-top shape. And then if you really want to kind of get into quieting the car down, the move is going to be doing all this in the interior. Remove the seats, remove the carpet, and you can actually add layers of sound insulation. You can do heat insulation too, for that matter. A lot of it is like a butyl, like a sticky back sort of sheet that you can lay out on the floor, use kind of a roller to sort of smush it on the floor and it will stick. And that just helps with, it's just a real dense material that the sound can't penetrate quite as well. And then you can add extra layers over the top, like foam and jute matting, and then put your carpet back down over it. But at least inside the car, it's away from heat, it's away from any kind of moving objects. That's the safest way to do it. And I would say if you're a DIY type person, you're not afraid to maybe pull the seats and carpet from your car, you could absolutely do this yourself. It's not really any harder than any kind of like an arts and crafts project, beyond getting the seats out of the car. I will say though, it is a cost. You have to buy several different materials. You might need a couple of tools for this, plus all your time. If you're not comfortable doing something like this yourself, and you go to pay someone to do this, this is going to be hours and hours of labor, and it's going to cost a ton of money to probably realistically reduce the noise by just a couple of decibels. And in some cases, it might not even be noticeable, just to your ear, right? You'd have to measure it with a decibel meter. So it's a lot of money, a lot of effort for maybe minimal gains. But I mean, that's the thing, right? Cars age, they get old, rubber seals start to shrink. You might get a little wind noise that you didn't have before. So again, all this stuff adds up. So you just kind of take them one at a time and do the best you can with trying to mitigate that.
Yeah. And just know that engine noise and, those boxer engines have that kind of note to them.
They absolutely do. And, the all-wheel drive, there's more drivetrain components spinning underneath the car. All that adds up to noise.
Yeah. And if you want something that's truly quieter, I'm sure we have a list of the quietest cars at cr.org, but otherwise you can also look at our reviews of the newer Foresters, including used Foresters. You might just want to trade up a couple model years or two,
exactly,
which might be cheaper than paying someone to repad the inside of your
it
car.
Could be.
Exactly. Please don't put anything in that. Don't put anything under the hood.
Yeah, it's they put insulation under the hood from factory, but that's all specifically engineered. Engine covers, the belly pans, special foam that is oil resistant, coolant resistant. It's meant for those environments, and just the stuff that you can buy either online, a hardware store, or whatever. It just isn't meant for that.
Yeah, so please don't do that. All right. Good answers for Tom. And finally, the last question is coming from Kiptu from Kenya. So it's going to be a long distance mailing the swag. And Kiptu asks, I would like to get a great car when I'm older. So it should have good fuel economy, lots of safety features, a manual transmission available. So that rules out the 2025 Mini.
It does.
And at least 4 seats and good reliability. I was thinking about the Mini Cooper, but it doesn't come with AEB, blind spot warning, and rear cross traffic warning. What are my options? So this is an interesting one.
It's so interesting. And I got really excited when I saw this question.
Yeah. So why did you get excited?
Well, because it's a whole market that we don't know about. So first is like, what's available in Kenya as far as new cars go, right? And I think you did the same thing. We both jumped online to see what that market was like.
What are the top selling cars? Because you want to buy a car that everyone else has. You want to buy a car that there's parts for. Yeah. Especially
in, I would say, like growing car markets, right? Here in the US, we're very lucky. We've been doing cars for a long, long time. We have all this infrastructure. And I have a story I can kind of relate to this, but I didn't know anything about the Kenya car market. So I didn't want to go recommend a car and find out you can't get it there. That doesn't do, Kiptu any good, right? If it's something that just isn't available to them.
Yeah, exactly. So we looked, I looked to, some of these, it's interesting that you mentioned what was interesting to me, and I'm sure was interesting to you, Cassidy, is that the things that it doesn't come with. We don't quite know where these minis might be coming from, because there might be a gray market importer that might be coming from the UK. They might be coming, from South Africa. There might be a local market. So it's just a different vehicle, and they're equipped differently in different countries and in different markets. Even in Canada, cars are equipped differently than here. So I would say you might actually be able to find a Mini that has these features on it. You'd want to look for the blind spot warning, literally look on the car itself. And this is a problem no matter where you are in the world, that those listings on your online car marketplaces aren't necessarily going to be telling you what the car has. So go see the car in person, check to see if it has the little light on the sides of the mirrors to see if it has blind spot warning. Otherwise, there are some other cars out there. I noticed that BMW has a much higher market share than Mini. Basically everywhere, but especially in Kenya and in most of Africa. And you might be able to get better parts. Something like a 1 Series or a 2 Series would scratch that same itch, and you might have better parts availability, especially some of the cosmetic parts. I own a 30-year-old French car, of which there is fewer than 30 left in the United States, and finding every tiny little exterior piece for it is an absolute nightmare. They exist in other parts of the world, but you're going to pay a lot for shipping. So I would say my advice is, if you can't find a Mini, go to your BMW dealer. Anyone else have any other idea?
Yeah, I do. So again, think about what's available, right? And not so much for purchase where I'm getting at, but servicing and parts availability, like you mentioned. I had a customer that had an Audi Q7, and he was from Uganda, and he wanted to actually ship the Q7 back home to Uganda because he splits his time, here in the States and then in Uganda. And I was like, listen, I see you once a month for this Q7 in service. We're always chasing all these problems. I was like, is there an Audi dealer or something? An Audi specialist anywhere near where you are. And I think at least at the time, there might have been one Audi dealership in Uganda, and it was like a 4-hour drive from where this gentleman lived. And I was like, I don't think it's sustainable to take this particular vehicle, there. So, buy something that can be serviced locally with a lot of ease. And I mean, that's just sort of good tips for anybody. There's places in the US that are 3 and 4 hours from the nearest whatever dealership, and it becomes a project to get your car serviced.
It becomes a project for us sometimes with some of these newer electric brands.
Yeah.
Where the cars they're 2 hours away.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, so there's some advice. We don't have the perfect advice because we don't know the market that well, but keep an eye out, and I'm sure you'll find something you like. But thanks for writing to us, and thanks for watching. If you have a question, go to cr.org/talkingcars and put in your information. If you have questions about infotainment, about minis, about EVs, about auto start, stop, what car you should buy, and how not to start a fire under your hood. Any of those questions in here, and we'll send you some stuff, which is great. So, Cassidy, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
It's great, definitely. And we promise we'll bring you on for cars that aren't British, because there aren't that many left.
Man, okay.
Yes. If we get an Ineos, if we get a Grenadier, we'll bring you in. No promises. Thanks so much, and we'll talk cars again later.